Iran still refuses to sign, basically come to an agreement, which is they keep going back and forth. They refuse to concede on the two biggest issues that the U.S. keeps putting out as far as a deal that needs to go through. Compete, and the products actually usually don't get any better because there's no reason for them have to improve a product or make it cheaper. So when you take that monopoly away and the kind of like the tenets of capitalism come in at that point, the consumers win, and also the products get better, they get cheaper, everybody wins. So by the UAE leaving OPEC, you sort of take a OPEC sort of monopoly as far as like oil within the area takes a bit of a hit, which is actually, honestly, it's a good thing. So, but let's see. What you say things. Let's look at that. Okay, so what is the history of OPEC? So OPEC stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, was founded in September 1960 in Baghdad, Iraq, by Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela to coordinate petroleum policies, secure stable prices, and counter the dominance of the multinational Seven Sisters oil companies, headquartered in Vienna since 1965. So
OPEC is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. It was formed in 1960 by 5 oil exporting countries and has grown to include 9 more nations. The reason? 1960 was a time of a globalizing oil market. Demand was growing, but oil-producing countries weren't the ones benefiting. Global production and price was controlled by 7 Western oil companies. That's where OPEC came in. Its goal was to give power back to the nations who had the oil the world desperately wanted. Their plan was to regulate supply and to manipulate prices. In other words, become a cartel. Member countries meet every 2 years to set production quotas. The lower the quotas, the higher the price for oil-consuming countries. In its early days, OPEC did not have a lot of influence on prices. But in 1973, OPEC introduced an oil embargo. The crude price quadrupled. Some countries were forced to ration gasoline. At the time, OPEC accounted for about half of global oil supply. OPEC lost some influence in the 1980s. High oil prices meant people were switching to alternative fuel, non-OPEC production increased, and a global recession saw demand for oil decrease. By 1986, the price crashed. Over the next 3 decades, the price of oil continued to fluctuate for a number of different reasons, despite OPEC's attempts to control it. OPEC.
So you'll notice the giant drop here in 2008. So you went all the way up to $140 a barrel. And then you'll hear, if anybody watches the show Landman, they always talk about that they want the price to sit, I think it's like between it's like 80 and 100, which is like their fucking sweet spot, right? Because if it goes, I think I'm gonna fuck this up. If it, yeah, it's just, yeah, you can see, but this is many things, not just the overall housing industry, because if you guys remember the housing crisis of 2008. It looks like a number of different things in the economy were drastically affected, which, obviously was led to by the overall housing crisis, which kind of killed the economy. But a lot of the economy, as you can see, got crushed in a lot of different ways, including oil.
Influence has dwindled.
That's right, 75, 80. Yeah, so it's like, I know it's like if they don't want it to get like definitely a red line for it is like 100.
It now represents less than a third of the market share. Add to that the increase of non-OPEC nations to the oil market, like Canada and the US. Recently, OPEC said it would restrain output to boost prices. That would be the first production cut since 2008. But there are doubts that OPEC could even accomplish that.
All right. So there's a little history of OPEC. So yeah, they were not started by the United States. If anything, they were actually created to compete against what is they call them, 7 sister companies, which essentially were all Western oil companies, it looked like. And yeah, so that's interesting. I didn't realize that they were at one point, I knew that they controlled like half the world's oil supply, but I didn't realize that they had lost that they dropped to basically about a third. So that's something I didn't actually know. But because of all the stuff that's going on, OPEC's majority of what OPEC's strength is what's going on is affected by the Strait of Hormuz, right? And so, but you have to remember, like a lot of these countries outside of Iran, like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all these other countries are, who are the OPEC's members again? Let's go back. So Baghdad, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, yeah. And Venezuela, and obviously UAE joined later. But that it's interesting because of when Iran retaliated, if you can see that they pretty much struck almost everybody else who's on this list. So not only are they kind of screwing everything up for themselves, they're screwing things up for the other for these other countries, for the other Gulf country states, and they are not getting any love in the fact that the UAE is now actually doing offensive strikes into Iran is definitely telling of how the overall region feels about the situation and how they feel about Iran. So nobody here, I can tell you, outside of Iran and China, want the current Islamic Republic to stay in power. Yeah, it says founded in 1960 as a response to the Western oil companies unilaterally reducing the posted price. So it's kind of interesting because OPEC was sort of created because these the other 7 nations that they talk about had sort of a monopoly, and so obviously OPEC was created to sort of break up that monopoly, which makes sense, right? Monopolies never help anybody. I'll tell you that right now. Like when you're unless you are the in charge of that particular, or you're a CEO of one of those companies that's a part of the monopoly, that's the only time. But majority of the world does not benefit from monopolies. So they should always be broken up, or they're always competitors, right? And there's so many different parallels to this, right? And actually, something that also you can always think about is when governments are in control of industries and when it's not privatized. Let's take space. How little was space, because space until Elon Musk and SpaceX, space travel could only be done by governments because it was so expensive that they're the only ones who could afford it. But what happens as soon as you let a private company come in, right? What does capitalism lead to? Is they want to make a product, they make it as efficient as they can, and they make it as cheap as they can. And that's exactly, and now they've revolutionized the space industry, and now we can set up rockets all the time. Why? Because essentially a capitalist company, a private company came in and made an industry better. So you don't want monopolies, and you don't want governments controlling industrial or certain, pretty much any industry, because especially for somebody who worked in the government for most of his career, I can tell you the government should never be in charge of anything. They just screw it up.